It's 1944. A thunderstorm of flak fills the European sky, and a lone P-47 Thunderbolt limps home, half its engine gone, oil splattering across the canopy, the prop barely turning. The pilot knows one thing: he's not supposed to be alive right now. This is the story of the unkillable machine and the men who flew it like they were immortal. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, nicknamed the Jug, wasn't pretty, it wasn't graceful, it was heavy, brutish, and built like a flying tank. But it had one purpose: bring the pilot home no matter what. And somehow, it did. In 1943, American pilots entered the skies of Europe in a new kind of beast: 8 machine guns, a 2,000 horsepower engine, and enough armor to shrug off 20mm cannon shells. German pilots mocked it. Too slow, they said, too fat to fight. But when the P-47s dived from 30,000 feet, their laughter stopped. The Thunderbolt could hit 700 kilometers per hour in a dive, fast enough to rip its own wings off if the pilot didn't ease up. It was a monster that fell from the sky, spitting fire. On their first missions over France, P-47s tangled with the Luftwaffe's finest, Bf-109s and FW-190s. The Germans had experience, maneuverability, and home advantage, but the Americans had horsepower and luck made of steel. One pilot returned with half a cylinder head blown clean off. Another landed with bullet holes in his propeller. A third lost half his tail and still rolled onto the runway like nothing happened. The ground crews couldn't believe it. Mechanics gathered around, shaking their heads, tapping the shattered engine blocks that should have been coffins. And yet, each time, the pilot climbed out alive. The secret was in the design. The P-47's massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine wasn't just powerful, it was practically indestructible. Liquid-cooled German fighters would catch fire after one hit to the radiator. But the P-47, its air-cooled radial, meant you could blow off an entire cylinder head, and the other 17 would just keep turning. It was like losing a leg and still running a marathon. Even the cockpit was wrapped in armor. A steel bathtub protected the pilot from behind and below. When German bullets tore through wings and fuselage, they'd stop cold at the cockpit wall. The Jug didn't care if it bled. It only cared if the man inside made it home. One day, in 1944, Lieutenant Robert "Punchy" Powell was hit over Germany. Cannon shells ripped through his right wing and exploded under his engine. Oil pressure dropped to zero. The engine began to smoke, sputter, and die. He turned towards England anyway. 70 miles, then 50, then 20. He crossed the channel with flames licking his cowling, gliding on what felt like prayer and momentum. He landed in a farmer's field, slid to a stop, and climbed out, his plane smoking, silent, and still. Half his engine was gone, but he wasn't. And he wasn't the only one. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of these landings. Photos showed P-47s missing cowling panels, riddled with holes, even missing wingtips. One came back with part of its engine literally hanging off, dangling from hoses. And yet, they made it home. As the war dragged on, the P-47 became more than just a fighter. It became a lifeline for soldiers on the ground. It strafed German convoys, shredded tanks, and blasted rail lines across occupied Europe. Pilots flew so low their propellers clipped trees. Flak tore their wings, shrapnel peppered their engines. And still, they'd limp back across the channel, half dead, half machine, but alive. The Germans began to fear the sound, that deep, snarling thunder in the distance, the sound of a Jug diving. By 1945, the Thunderbolt had flown more combat missions than any other Allied fighter. Over 1 million sortie, countless kills. But its most incredible record wasn't how many it destroyed, it was how many it saved. The survival rate for P-47 pilots was among the highest in the war, not because they avoided danger, but because their aircraft refused to die. They joked that the Jug could take more punishment than a Sherman tank, and sometimes it did. When a P-47 came back with cylinder heads blown off, smoke trailing, engine coughing like a dying beast, it wasn't a miracle. It was just another day for the Jug. After the war, the P-47 was replaced by sleeker, faster jets. The old warhorse was retired, scrapped, sold, forgotten. But to the men who flew it, it was more than aluminum and engines. It was a guardian, a friend that had stared death in the face and said, "Not today." In interviews years later, those pilots still spoke of their Thunderbolts with reverence, not as machines, but as living things that had chosen to survive alongside them. Imagine it. You're 22 years old, somewhere over enemy territory. Your cockpit smells like smoke and oil. The gauges are dead. The radio silent. The world outside is gray and endless. And yet, you keep flying, because the jug keeps flying. One more minute, one more mile, one more heartbeat. You cross the coast. You see the white cliffs of Dover, and you realize you made it. You're alive. Half the engine gone, but your will untouched. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't the fastest, the prettiest, or the most famous, but it was the toughest. And for the men who limped home with fire in their engines and bullet holes in their wings, it was proof that sometimes brute strength and stubborn will are enough to beat death itself. Decades later, in quiet museums and private hangars, the ghosts of those flights still live on. Visitors stand before the hulking remains of a P-47, its olive green paint faded, bullet holes patched, propeller blades bent like scars from another lifetime. Children trace their fingers across the metal, not knowing that once men trusted this machine more than their own heartbeat. Each dent tells a story of survival. Each scorch mark whispers a name that history almost forgot. Somewhere, deep inside that old radial engine, the echo of thunder still lingers, reminding us that courage sometimes sounds like steel refusing to die. The skies are quiet now. No flak, no smoke, just wind. But if you listen closely, really listen, you might still hear the faint growl of the Thunderbolt far above, carving through the clouds. The men who flew them are gone, yet their legacy still flies, unseen but alive in every pilot who's ever prayed to make it home. Because the P-47 wasn't just a plane, it was a promise. That even when the world falls apart around you, you keep flying. Half the engine gone, but the heart untouched.